Hi, everybody. It's Bryan Eisenberg, and I am here with my good friend Patrick Jones from the Patrick Jones podcast. It has been such a pleasure knowing Patrick over the last, 3+ years, watching him grow his podcast. He recently finished recording episode 250, so almost 5 years of going after it. And I think I've known you for more than half of that journey. You've also gone ahead and you've coached in the professional organizations. You've coached at high school level. You're a private coach. Lately, you've been spending a lot of time interviewing travel bowl organizations and college coaches to talk about college recruiting. So there's a lot I want to talk to you about today. But one of the things I really want to bring up, and I think there's some very parallel pieces to the story in your journey and what my son Sammy has gone through, which is people not believing in you, right? And not letting someone else's opinion of you judge or influence your own self-worth. Because I remember years ago, people questioning, what does Patrick know about hitting and blah, blah, blah. I had commented that you're just such a great student. And of course, about 3 years ago, Sammy tried out for his high school team, didn't make it, and turned out to be a blessing in disguise. So let's talk about that. Why do you think being doubted is such a blessing in disguise?
Well, first off, I appreciate you having me on your podcast. I'm excited to do this. And Bryan, I know like you said, we've been friends for a few years now. It's been crazy how, it's already been, several years we've known each other, because it doesn't necessarily feel that long. But I would say for me, like being doubted, I think you're always looking for, something to keep you going, keep you hungry. And I think being doubted can help with that. Right. And it's kind of going back to, before we started recording, we talked about dealing with failure and, telling players that too. But I think as a coach or as a person, learning how to deal with people not believing in you or how to deal with failure in that regard is extremely important too. I mean, for me, growing up, I was very lucky in the sense that my mom, who does very well for a living. I always had everything that I needed or wanted. But I remember one specific time I came home and I wasn't happy. And I think what ended up happening was there was some girl I liked, and she told me that she wasn't interested. And so I was disappointed. And I told this to my mom, and she was, she always just stayed pretty calm. And she was like, "I'm glad." And she went on to say, she's like, "I don't want everything to be easy for you, because if everything's easy for you, then you don't want to appreciate it. You won't make changes. You won't grow." And so like, I'm glad that this happened. And I hope this isn't the last time that you deal with rejection, just because I know in the long term, it's going to make you better. And so I think back to that moment a lot of times with my mom, and whether it's coaching or business or whatever it is. And I just view it as a good thing, as a learning opportunity and growth opportunity when people don't believe in you, or maybe, overlook you or whatever it is, just because I know what's on the other side of that. And that's usually my best.
Yeah, adversity is a great lesson. And it's like, I think it was it Muhammad Ali who said, it doesn't matter how many times you get punched. It only matters how many times you get back up.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's one of the key things, I've taken away from you. It's, when you first started the podcast, people didn't know how good you are. You've recently hired a podcast coach. You're going on episode 250. Your numbers are growing exponentially. I mean, you've really come a long way on the podcasting side, but also on the baseball professional side. And I think there's some parallels for the parents and the student athletes listening here in terms of that consistency, because you deliver a podcast every week. You work on your craft every week. You work on your communication every day with athletes. What is it that drives you to keep trying to be better, that hopefully people listening to this can take home and put in their pocket and be like, yeah, that's what I needed to help me get to that next level?
For me, oftentimes when we think about how fast time goes, and and getting older. And for some people, that's depressing. But for me, it's exciting. It's exciting because I know the older I get, the better I'm going to get too, because I know I'm pushing myself and I'm continuing to grow and get better. So I can't wait for 5 years out, 10 years out to see how good I'm going to be, because I know that every single day, I'm giving whatever 100% of whatever I have that day. And I think the other part of it too is there's going to be, I understand that there's going to be days that I don't feel like doing anything, or, I mean, as a human being, there's days, you don't feel good. You're sad or whatever it is. And obviously that's not every day, hopefully, but I think it's accepting of those feelings too, and not fighting that, and just understanding that that's part of being a human. You're not going to want to necessarily grow every single day. But if you do understand that not everyone is going to feel great all the time, it's going to allow you to push through and be like, hey, I'm just like everybody else. We always have bad days. But for me, if you're not growing, you're dying in everything you do. And I think that that's one of the reasons that burnout happens, and whatever you're doing for a living is you just continue doing the same thing every single day. So I think I'm always looking to get better, always looking to grow in any capacity that I can. And it's fun. It's fun to get better. It's fun to grow, and it's fun to learn. And sometimes, learning isn't necessarily just reading a book. It's taking action too. I think that's a great way to learn, is be able to experiment and start, a new podcast. And maybe the episodes aren't very good early on, but you took action, and over time you learn and you grow and you get better. So that's for me why it is it's so important to continue to grow and get better.
Now, a lot of people listening may not know that, you started the idea for your podcast back when you were still playing. It grew out of there. Knowing what you know now, and, you were on Sammy's podcast about 3 years ago when, he was 13 years old. That makes you, by the way, the first person on this feed to have both been interviewed by Sammy and by me, now that I've taken it over for him. What would you tell other athletes about the benefits of, whether it's podcasting or journaling in any other way, to get their ideas, to interview people, to explore? What would you tell them today about it?
I would say was maybe just starting out from like a podcasting standpoint. I mean, I've done over 250 episodes. That's 200, I've had a couple reoccurring guests, but I think, well, now I'm over 250 episodes. So I've had 250 people that I didn't know, and now I know. We've had an hour-long conversation. And so that opens up a network of people, and those people open up another network of other people too within the industry that I'm in. So from a networking standpoint, it's huge. I mean, to be able to, we've all heard it. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So being able to bounce ideas off of different coaches who at the professional, college, high school level, all that stuff is extremely important. And so I would say, like, that's one benefit. Two is the communication piece. I mean, learning how to speak in front of people, a microphone, interviewing somebody, being interviewed. That's extremely important. You can take a skill like that pretty much everywhere. So I would say, like, that's the second piece of it. And I think the third piece is, you'll continue to grow when you start doing things. Like I mentioned before, taking action is so important too. So I think for me, you got to be careful, especially if you're an athlete, because there's going to be people out there saying stuff to you. And if you say something back, then it seems like there's always somebody waiting to take a screenshot and for it to go viral. But if you can kind of ignore that noise and just focus on, you and yourself and growing as a person or as an athlete, I think, those are some of the benefits that can be, really beneficial towards you.
Something you said just really triggered me. So this past weekend, Sammy, he's been umpiring for the last couple of years at, like, the local rec league, but this past weekend he umpired for a tournament company, and of course it had to be the first weekend. It was about 100 degrees here, literally, in Austin, Texas. And Saturday he goes 7 games. Sunday he went 5 games, and then he had to get ready because he had to go to his own practice. And afterwards he told me, first of all, he has a new, like, he always had a huge respect for umpires, right? And especially, when as umpiring on his own. But for tournament ones that have to do all these games, he says he has a whole new respect for the type of commitment it is, because here he's out there trying to hydrate nonstop, but he's still cramping, and he ended up getting a foul tip off of him. But what really struck me more than anything, because I was there kind of just to help him out as he needed and stuff like that, refilling ice, the middle of the tournament, and I'm watching some of the games, and I'm parent watching, and there were three organizations that stuck out to me. One of them, I actually sent a note to the owner of the organization, because to see, I saw a second one of his teams show up, and I saw his parents and the way they behaved, the way they respected everybody and the other team, and the classiness of the organization. And so this is the Austin Sun Devils, and they were fantastic. It's like, this is the type of thing, and I've heard it from the college coaches, like, those are the kinds of parents we want our kids coming from. But then on the other side, and I won't name names, okay, there was one organization where the coaches nonstop were arguing and bickering and chattering just terribly about any little detail in the game. The strike zone was off a little bit. The tag was like, but he slid so well, like, just crazy stuff. And it's just like, but that has nothing to do with the game. And they're teaching kids, obviously, like, you can make an excuse for anything, and they don't realize this. And then another team, they lost in the semifinals. They'd driven a whole bunch of miles, from far away to get to this tournament. And Sammy has to go, and he has to get the scorecard signed and get the last pitch counts and stuff like that. And one of the parents refused to give him the pitch count from the last inning because they had lost. And he kept on going to their side most of the time, but then only went to the other side. And they were just being petty over this. It was bizarre, okay? And I understand they were upset. First, the coach never looked at all the kids they walked, all the errors they made. They want to blame the umpire. Not the whole point. The bigger point is something that you and I have talked about beforehand, and it involves recruiting, but also involves trying to find good organizations to have your kids develop in. How do you find those organizations? How do you background check to make sure they're focused in on the right pieces of development? They're not constantly giving your kids excuses. They're not coming out there with poor attitudes. How do parents do that? I mean, it's struggle.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. First off, that's number one. I would say, if a lot of it is word of mouth. A lot of it is, but I would say, if you could too, I would actually just go and if there's a specific organization or team you're thinking about potentially joining, if you could just go and watch a game and just show up and just watch and not even, say anything or have them even know you're there, and just kind of just see what they're like on a day-to-day basis. What's a regular game going to be like? I'd say that's probably the best way to go about it, because then you get to see them in action and on how they, communicate with the players, and what the players are, how they are on the field, and how the coaches are with the umpires and parents and all that. So I would say actually going to a game would be the biggest piece of advice that I would give, because I'm sure you'll be able to tell a lot, or a practice or whatever it may be. So I would say word of mouth would probably be the first one, just because, parents talk and things like that. I mean, I think you got to be a little bit careful there, because it just depends who's giving you the information. I mean, they may have their own agenda at play for playing time or whatever it is. So, maybe word of mouth, but also, if you can, I mean, I'd try to go to a practice or go to a game if that team that you're thinking about trying to join.
Yeah, in practices, usually you need permission to do that. But games, you could literally go to, a weekend tournament and just quietly sit in the stands and like I have, I'm there to watch Sammy, but I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention to the interactions of the parents, of, who's coaching. I mean, every little story you can imagine, every stereotype of the dad yelling at his kid at the end of the game. Yep, saw that. Just everything. It's all there if you're willing to go there and just be ears and just really pay attention.
Well, I think the other thing too, I mean, it depends on the age, but I would just have your son or daughter, whoever, I mean, reach out to some of those players. I mean, with social media, and kind of get their experience of being on the team, and if they like it, and what's it like. Because I mean, the players know firsthand, what it's like to be on that team or in that organization. So I think actually reaching out to some of those players, having your son reach out to some of those players, is another way to find out too.
So, but let's bring that back for a moment, because I think there's a key piece of that. Part of what keeps a lot of players on a lot of those teams is fear, right? They made a team, they're afraid they may not make another team. A team's got a great reputation. They've committed so many people, even though it's not necessarily that team, but maybe it's the organization. How do parents get past that fear? Because I think the concern is, if I don't get onto a particular brand name team or whatever, my kid's not going to make it to that next level.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, it's important to play on a good team. Definitely don't want to downplay that, because, you're going to be in good tournaments, and, winning games and being around other good players. That's very, very important too. But I would say the other thing is, and I've had a lot of college coaches on my podcast recently talk about recruiting. It's pretty rare for a college coach to just go to a game just to go to a game, and not have an agenda of who he's going to actually go and watch play. So I think you need to have somebody who's out there, like getting your name out there, or sending your information to coaches to actually get them to come watch you play if they're interested. So there's playing on a good team is important, no question about that. But don't just think, I mean, unless you're one of the best players in the country, it's going to be hard, just to be found. I mean, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of players out there, and only 3 coaches per D1 staff can actually go out and recruit, and they can't be everywhere at once. So they're not just picking just random games. They're going there to see specific players. So I think, being on a good travel team, yes, of course, that's important, but you also need to have somebody who is out there, who is helping get your name out there, to get those coaches to come watch you play and have interest in you, because it's so easy to be overlooked. And let's face it, Bryan, I could go to a game and a kid have, one bad game, right? And maybe I'm there to see another kid. Well, obviously, if I'm there to see another kid, and and your son has a bad game, I'm not going to write him down, right? But maybe he's a really good player. But how would I necessarily know that unless someone was telling me that or giving me more information? So I would say, those would be the 2 things. Is, yes, it is important to be on a good travel team, but it's not the end all be all. You need to have someone who has connections to college coaches to help gauge that interest too.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't hurt. Like, for example, the organization that Sammy plays for, he's been at it for 16 years, and 95% of the kids that have gone through his program have gone on to play in college or have signed professional contracts. So, he's got a big database of people who respect him. And, when, they call him and say, hey, what can you tell me about Sammy? He can tell them, here's how he competes. Here's how, here's where I think he's going to be in a couple of years. Here's what it looks like. Cause obviously there he can also see where he works out and stuff. So it makes a difference. Let's touch on that for a minute. Cause obviously you're sitting right in front of your hit tracks there. And I know, a lot of kids think, that what's going to get their college coach's attention is, maybe they're putting up some big numbers on hit tracks. And we both love hit tracks, obviously, but do college coaches actually care what the numbers are in the hit tracks? What's catching their attention?
Well, I think that what they're looking at is what's the potential of the player. If there's a player who can hit a baseball over 100 miles an hour, okay, like he's got he's got a tool there potentially, and so yeah, that does help. But then the next thing is like, okay, like, well, does it play in the game? Does he consistently hit barrels with it? So it is important just as a measuring tool to see like how big their engine is. But I wouldn't say that they're, obsessing over it. They just, and the difference between a kid who maxes out at 97 versus 100, I can't imagine that's a big difference. That a college coach is going to be like, oh, I'm not going to go see the kid who only hit 97 versus kid 100, because they're also looking at movement, right? Their mechanics of their swing. Do they think that's going to play out? They're looking at their body type, right? Are they completely filled out, or are they still, is there still room to grow and develop into their body? So they will look at what the potential could be. Do they have some strength there, especially when you start facing better pitching, you're facing harder pitching. So you got to have some strength to be able to catch up to higher velocity. So I think that's the main thing that they're looking for. But after that, then we start getting into, more important things, right? Like, is he actually a hitter? Does he make adjustments? Does he have an approach? Does he, all these other things that are so important. So, but you have to have that first piece for some schools to even look at the next one. Because if you can have the greatest approach in the world, if you're swinging a wet newspaper, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's more like a check mark. Like,
Right.
If you've got it, great. If you still can't hit in a game, it's irrelevant.
Right. 100%. Yeah.
Let's go here. You have, in the last few years, coached in professional organization. You've been a high school coach, as we start earlier. You've also been spending a lot of time, like you said, interviewing college coaches, and you've also spent a lot of time looking at some travel organizations and interviewing some of the people who are responsible for them, like the guy from
US Elite.
The US Elite this past week, and his 12 commandments, which I can't tell you how many times I've heard those same things from Keith, and how important it is for those families to get that. So absolutely, those are key messages. And I think any parent who's in a travel organization whose organization is not telling them those things, that should be a red flag for them to begin with. So make sure they go listen to that. But here's my question for you. Over these last 2-3 years that you've gone like this whole cycle of up, down, and you've kind of seen everything from youth to pro. Two things. How does development look differently in a professional organization? How do they think about it compared to how the typical parent looks about it? And what's changed for in your opinion, over the last 2 or 3 years?
I would say that's a good, very good question. Say patience is something that, depending on the organization, and I would say parents don't have necessarily as much patience, just because and players too at the younger levels, because they want it right now. They just don't know. They don't know how long it truly takes, development takes, and why you don't need to just rush to make changes after one bad, weekend or whatever it is. And, for example, like and another thing, I'll give you an example. So there is a player who, I won't name names, but he hit very well last year. A little bit of a funky mechanics type of a thing, but he hit well last year. And so he started using some different technology over the off season. And so he changed his swing to base it around some of these numbers on this piece of tech. And so his swing looks better based on these metrics, but he's not hitting in the game. And so then you start to wonder, okay, well, maybe those funky mechanics and that, the hitch he had made him who he is. But because we're in this era where it's like, oh, we got to be great right now, this second, we start making all these changes right away. And so I see that a lot more at the youth level, and at the professional level. Professional level it's unique in the sense that everyone, I might want to better watch what I say here, but
we're among friends. It's okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of voices at the professional level, right? I mean, in the private side, for example, like it's just me and the player, and me and the parent and the player. The professional side, there's a lot of people involved coming in, watching on a day-to-day basis. And so I took the approach at the pro level of letting players know that, showing them that I don't have any agenda, right? I'm not trying to change them just to change them. I want them to own who they are, because I think if they own who they are and can become their own best hitting coach, I think that's going to take them to their highest level that they possibly can be at. So I would say that's part of it. Just there's a lot of just voices at the pro game, I would say is the big thing. And And then it's also, you get into like the political side of, you know, if a player makes changes or plays well, you know, getting credit for that. And it's just, I'm just not a fan of that. To be honest, I think more than anything else, we're there to help the player. We're there to be there if they need help or if they want someone to talk to. But it's just hard for me to get on board with saying that, you know, I made so and so a great hitter, or I helped them, or whatever it is. You know, we did some drill in the cage and now they're hitting well, and you know, I should get the credit. That's just not how it works. I just don't believe that. Never believed that. Never will believe that. It comes down, it is the player. If the player does well, hey, the player should get the credit. If he doesn't do well, then you can put the blame on me. Like, I'll take it, you know, because, you know, I'm the coach. But I just don't believe in taking credit. And when it's the player should be, the player is and always should be the show, period.
I love that you say that. I don't know if you see it's not super clear, the map behind me.
Yep.
It was given to me. It was given to me by my mentor, Roy Williams, right? Who I wrote my book, Be Like Amazon with. And it's a map he found in Australia. And I keep it on my wall behind me for one main purpose. It's to show the world always looks different from a different perspective, right? And the job of a great coach is just that, is to reflect back perspective to that player, perspective from your experience, perspective from being outside of their own body, right? You can see different things that they can't, unfortunately, right? But it's still the same landmass. It doesn't change.
Yes. Coaching, it's all about timing. I think the really good coaches, they understand that. They read body language. Well, the thing is, to be a really, really good coach, in my opinion, like, you got to have some emotional intelligence. You know, I think the self-awareness piece is huge. But I also think it's important to learn from some of these coaches who've been doing this for 30 years too. And that can help you with the timing aspect of when you go about delivering something to a player, and, you know, letting them come to you and not just always trying to just throw more and more and more stuff in their face. I mean, there's an art to it. There really is. Problem is, and this is, in my opinion, it's a problem. It's not a problem for me, but I think it's a problem because you can't quantify it. So organizations, they don't know how to necessarily evaluate certain coaches because you can't quantify the art of coaching, much like you can't quantify the mental side of the game, even though it's the most important part of it from a player standpoint too. So, but it is what it is. I enjoy learning from experienced coaches who've been doing it a long, long time. I don't know any coach who can't break down a swing. You can just go online and see that. But you know, there's a lot of coaches who don't understand you know, what it takes to really truly help a player, get them to learn how they think best, how they work best, you know, get them have their own plan and approach at the plate. It's very difficult, especially when you're talking about doing that in a team environment and not just one-on-one. There's not just one way to go about it. And so I think having humility is extremely important. And the last thing is, Bryan, you know, you hear everyone always says the right thing, right? Like, even right now for me, like, I'm saying all the right things, but it comes down to what I actually do. And so, you know, anyone can say that, you know, the right stuff, but it comes down to just action. As Marshawn Lynch would say, it's all about that action, boss.
That's 100% true. The biggest challenge I think that kids struggle with today is where they focus in that action. And I kind of want to leave us here with kind of you answering this. And you did an episode on this, but I'm going to ask you if you know, maybe you have some revised thought on this. You know, you don't have any kids yet, right? But if you had a kid and you had to help them and guide them and do whatever it took to help them get to the college level, like, you know, and you've been in the game. Obviously, I had to do this kind of from the outside. What would you do? What would you do that most parents probably aren't doing today?
Ooh, so like starting when he was a young kid?
Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't focus very much on mechanics. I'd want him to just try to just swing hard at a young age and build the engine, have fun. Like if he comes to me and wants me and asks questions or whatever, then I'll answer him, but I'm not going to go, dragging him out to the field or anything like that. Like I'm just going to let him kind of just take the reins. And if he wants it and wants me to go throw, I'll go throw as long as he wants. But I want him to just fall in love with the game first. Because if you don't love the game, then you're not going to last. I can promise you that. So I would do that as a young kid and start just doing basic movement patterns with him, just different things to help build that foundation for when he starts lifting weights. And then, the older he gets, then we can start lifting those weights and getting stronger. And same thing, I'm not going to talk a ton about mechanics with him. It's more so, the older he gets, it's will be more so about approach and game planning and things like that. And of course, if there's things that pop up with mechanics, then we'll talk about it. But I think so many times kids have mechanical flaws because of bad coaching at younger ages. I think a lot of times if we just let kids be and just let them swing hard, even if that means that they fail at times, I think in the long run, they'll move better, because the older they get, if they don't have those good foundational movement patterns, it is so hard to change them. So that's what I would do. And then the older that they would get, I would want them to start trying to hit breaking balls a lot at a young age, because I know what ends up happening. What separates hitters isn't, can you hit a ball 100 miles an hour or 97 miles an hour off of hit tracks? It's, can you lay off that nasty slider? And so that pitch recognition becomes so important. So the approach piece, the pitch recognition piece, the swing decisions, all that stuff that's what separates guys the higher up that they get. And then lastly, it's just, making sure that he's in a place where he can have fun and he can enjoy the game and love the game and know that me, like I'm his dad first. I was talking to my dad the other day and he was like, you can be either a dad or B, a coach, but you can't be both. And so I think that's important to note too, where I would always be there for my kid, but there's a fine line, right? After a bad game or whatever, like I'm not talking to him on the car ride home about the game, because I know, having now coached in professional baseball, how many good players at times look awful during games. And guess what? They come back. It's okay. The more you get on top of them and the more you're like, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? The longer they stay in that hole. So understanding that how important patience is would be the last thing too. And how you got to play the long game in hitting and in baseball, even if you're like, well, I got to get a scholarship because next year is my senior year or whatever, and we got to go now. Yeah, you need to work with a sense of urgency, but also display patience too, because starting to panic, the kid feels that and they start to panic too. And I can promise you, he's not going to be able to perform at his best. So those would be a few of the things. Is more than anything else though, I would just want him to enjoy the moments of me and him working together, playing together. Some of the greatest memories I have growing up and just in general in my baseball life are just my dad and I going to the park together and just playing, and him just hitting me fly balls and throwing to me. And, I have a stepdad too. He was unfortunately disabled, but shoot, man, I remember when I was 7 years old, he'd be in a wheelchair and he would try to play catch with me too. Like obviously I'm over 30 now. But I never forget that. I never forget that, And so I think that's what's most important more than anything else.
I 100% agree.
Yeah, you're gonna make me tear up here in a minute, but
that's okay. Our good friend Joe would not. You'd think we had a good conversation if we didn't have a little laughter, little tears. So we're there. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because as I do my podcast, I'm staring out at my garage is like right there, and I remember I'll never forget the day Sammy hit a ball. It was a lot, Jug's ball. 78 miles an hour is like the hardest he's ever hit it. Line drive right into the glass light. Okay. Just crushed the ball. Like it was like the hardest he's ever hit. And it's like, yeah, those memories. It's like, I have not fixed that light because I want him to remember it. Like when we sell the house, I'll fix that light. But every single time we go out that door, I want him to remember that great feeling he had of, I mean, I was trying to get him out and he smashed that ball, right? And those little things matter. It's the little moments. It's not what we think are the big moments. And parents just take it for granted. And it goes by so fast. When Sammy had you on the podcast, he was a little kid. He was 13 years old.
Yeah.
He was 13 years old. The other day, I was on a Zoom call with Alan Yeager, and he hasn't seen Sammy also in about 3 years at ABCA. And, we both stood back there, and he looked at Sammy. He's like, he's not a young boy anymore. He's a man, he's going off to college, in a year. And it's like, it goes by really quickly. And I hope more than anything, parents realize the day in, the day out, the determination, the grit, the people not believing in him, being there to support them, that's the greatest gift that you can give your kids.
100%. Yeah. 100%. I mean, you're going to get knocked down. I mean, there's going to be times when you fail, and I'll give you another story real quick about my stepdad again, but my parents were divorced when I was like 1 or 2 years old. And I remember I was staying with my mom at the time, and she was dating somebody she ended up being my stepdad. And at the time, but he was disabled. So even at the time, so he had a cane, and then anywhere long distance, it was a wheelchair. And so there'd be times he would fall down, he would fall down. And so as a kid, I think I must have been 6 years old. And so every night before I would go to bed, I would tell her like all the reasons that you can't marry Tim. And I remember one night I said, but he falls down all the time. You can't marry him, because I wanted my parents to get back together like any kid.
Of course.
And I'll never forget what she said. And I was 6 years old. And I still vividly remember that. She goes, yes, he falls down, but what does he do every time he falls down? He gets back up. And so I think that's something that I will always remember, where when I do get knocked down, when people don't think I can do something, when I fail or whatever, I will always remember that. And that became a thing, throughout my childhood, because there was a lot more times he would fall down and a lot more times he'd get back up too. And so I'll always remember that. And, nothing to do with baseball, but it has everything to do with life, and it helps with baseball too.
That's exactly it. And we can bring it right full circle, right?
Yep.
Doesn't matter how many times you fall down, as long as you keep fighting to get back up.
Yep.
Patrick, thank you so much. Where can people find you? Of course, I told them they have to listen to your podcast. I think it's become one of the must listen to baseball development podcasts for sure. And of course, where can they find you on social media?
So I'm at P Jones Baseball on all social media accounts, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. But PatrickJonesBaseball.com is my website. But yeah, you feel free to just DM me on Twitter or Instagram, and I'll get back with you. But I appreciate everything that you're doing for the game, Bryan, and this podcast, and a lot of the content that you're putting out on the even just the recruiting side and getting some of that information out. I think it's huge. And I know you're not doing it to make any money or anything like that. You're just doing it just because you want to get good information out and help more kids, because you saw what Sammy went through, and you want more parents to just be educated throughout the process so they can enjoy the process because of how quickly it goes. So appreciate everything that you're doing. And I can't believe we've already known each other over 3 years, but it's been a lot of fun, and look forward to continuing our relationship.
Absolutely. And hopefully by 3 years from now, my podcast is as big as yours. So
I'm sure probably be bigger. We'll
see. Thank you so much.